So the island I was talking about there, that little tiny volcanic island, was an island called Iwo Jima. And like I mentioned before, it wasn't because of the size that was important, it was the location. Iwo Jima was within striking distance of the actual island of Japan. And so if they were going to try to attack Japan through air, land, sea, whatever, Iwo Jima was going to be half the place to be. And so they go to try to take it over there. We're talking about February 19th, 1945 is the date when they started this. And they thought that they could loosen up the hold, if you will, or weaken the resolve of the Japanese by just bombing the daylights out of the island. And like I said, I'll drop some bombs. Sorry, not drop bombs, some videos in the link there about Iwo Jima. There's several movies out there about Iwo Jima. There's one, and of course, Iwo Jima is the famous, if you look at the photos of the PowerPoint, the famous photo of the four soldiers planting the flag on top of Mount Suribachi. That's the mountain that's there on the south, whatever, I think it's west corner of the island. And that's the famous photo. There's a movie called The Flags of Our Fathers that has to do with the men behind that picture. It's kind of an interesting story that when they, well, I'll get to it in a second. So what they had to do is go take the island. So they bombard that island as much as possible. The Japanese, though, were expecting this attack. And they had built a huge network of underground tunnels throughout the mountain, throughout the island itself. And so the Americans bomb it. They hit it with everything they got. They think that they had softened the blow, if you will, or weakened their defenses. They make a landing on the island. They establish a beachhead. All is quiet. But when they actually start to try to step in, they get bombarded. And the Japanese put up a fight for the ages. And you're talking about they had to fight 21,000, and the Japanese had all kinds of troops there. 21,000 Japanese defenders for every 1 foot of land that they gained. Think about that. For every 1 foot of land they had to gain, they had to fight 21,000 Japanese troops. Amazingly, they do take the island, and they do take the mountain. Some 20,000 wounded, some 6,800 American soldiers killed. Very costly for the amount of land that they gained. But when they did, back to the story I was talking about, they actually plant a flag up on the top of the mountain. It was called Mount Suribachi. And that's where you get the iconic, four guys hitting the flag on there. The interesting thing is that actually wasn't the first flag to be planted. There was a couple guys that had scaled the mountain even before they had fully taken it. I mean, we're talking about they ran over enemy lines, quite literally, to plant this flag. They plant it, and they lose the mountaintop. The Japanese come and take it. The second time around, it's highly publicized. In fact, a couple cameramen had come up, and that's where you get the iconic photo itself. We don't have one in your book, but like I said, I'll throw one on there, throw you a link. And the iconic four guys planting the flag there in the mountain. And even when they planted the flag, it was still several weeks before they entirely captured the island. But they do. They eventually capture Iwo Jima. That was the big one. One of the big ones. The last big one that they had to take was the island of Okinawa. And Okinawa was the last domino to fall. This was the last one before taking the actual Japanese mainland. This was the big one. And so they get to the borders of Okinawa. It's another island that's just to the south part of Japan. And the Japanese put up their last struggle, I guess you could say, or last effort to be able to stop the American advance. They used 2,000 kamikazes. I mean, they throw everything they can at the Americans. In fact, the civilians living on the island of Okinawa, the Japanese army starts distributing grenades to them. You're talking about some 140,000 Japanese civilians actually commit suicide because the Japanese military and Japanese propaganda had went over and over again and told the Japanese people that these Americans, they were vicious, they were inhumane, they would do terrible things to these people if they were captured. So rather than be captured and face the Americans, they said, well, we won't do that. We will just go ahead and commit suicide. And you're talking about massive numbers that did that. Eventually, though, Okinawa is taken. And it was kind of interesting because at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, both, Chester Nimitz, which was that admiral that took the Battle of Coral Sea, he had the famous quote that he said, "Uncommon valor was a common virtue among these troops, among these soldiers." Because this was fierce fighting. This was every foot, as we mentioned before, every foot gained was at a high cost and was a huge undertaking. Well, the Americans do take Okinawa. The only thing that lays left is the actual island of Japan. And this was going to be a big one because the Japanese people were not going to surrender. They were not going to give in. So the question was, what do? Do you have an amphibious assault? Do you just start dropping bombs everywhere on the island of Japan? I mean, how do you attack a nation, and how do you defeat a nation that just will not be surrendered and will not be defeated? That was at least their mindset. So they have to start planning and strategizing. The Americans do. All along the way as well, there is a meeting that goes down in February of 1945. By the way, Okinawa there was April of 1945. Took 2 months to take it. But just a couple months earlier, there was a conference that goes down between FDR and Roosevelt, which was FDR, Churchill, and now Joseph Stalin. So here was the interesting thing. When Russia was invaded by Germany, Russia decided that they would not, obviously, join the German cause anymore. Right? They had that non-aggression pact. Hitler went against it. So now Russia joins the side of the Allies. Well, the Allies are a little bit skeptical of this because, a couple years earlier, they were enemies of the Allies. So here you have these guys that have flip-flopped sides, and it was going to be difficult to trust him. It was going to be difficult to trust him. And so they meet. Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill meet at a place called Yalta. It was a resort pretty much out on the Black Sea. And they're going to meet and they're going to talk and discuss, what's going to go on. All right. I mean, what are you guys going to do? What are we going to accomplish? How are we going to take down this war machine that is Hitler? So they meet, and this is, by the way, Roosevelt is also going for re-election. In 1944, he ran for re-election. He won a fourth term, by the way. So FDR has now been elected 4 times as president. He could serve 16 years, which is pretty unbelievable to think about. And so 1945 rolls around. He's at this Yalta conference. He has polio, if you remember. I talked about polio there that Roosevelt had. And it's really starting to wear on him. And his health is digressing. 1945, he ends up dying, does FDR. And he's replaced by his vice president, Harry Truman. Harry Truman was this little-known senator from Missouri. Not big into politics, not a very well-known guy. And so Roosevelt goes to Yalta. He is weak in health. He's struggling to kind of just get by, I guess you could say. And because of it, both he and Churchill, when they hear what Stalin has, sorry guys, I'm struggling here. When they hear what Stalin has to say, they kind of give in to his demands almost. They're very soft on him. FDR thought that he could deal with Stalin in one way, and Stalin really kind of just bamboozles him a little bit, if you will. And Churchill also kind of got a little bit mistaken for how he could deal with Stalin. Stalin got some, anyway. The Yalta Conference was all about those 3 countries getting together, how to defeat Hitler, and what would Russia gain after World War II. And so Russia gained a lot more after World War II than what they really should have. And that was what Yalta was all about. So Yalta goes down. Roosevelt dies shortly after Yalta Conference. In fact, 8 weeks later, dies of a cerebral hemorrhage down in Georgia. He went to Georgia all the time, by the way, Warm Springs, Georgia. He thought it could help eliminate his polio. So he would sit in these pools for hours trying to eliminate his polio, or at least slow the effects. Could never actually do it. And Harry Truman becomes president in April of 1945. So this is April 12th. So April the 20th, 1945, the Allies are in Germany. They have moved to where they're in Berlin. Actually just outside of Berlin. The Soviets are bombarding the city of Berlin. The Allies, as far as the Americans and the British, they're knocking on the doorstep. Hitler retreats to his bunker in the capital city there of Berlin. And in fact, it was his 56th birthday. It was April 20th. He goes in and gets into his bunker there, kind of hunkers down, if you will. And he is still doing his headquarters, and he's just turned 56 years old. He's still trying to do what he can. 10 days later, though, April 30th, 1945, Hitler is in his bunker, in his underground headquarters, and he makes the decision that he can't continue anymore. And rather than surrender, rather than give in or give up, whatever it might be, the story is that the Fuhrer there gave cyanide, which was a poison back then. He gave a cyanide to both his dogs, dog and his pups there. And then he and his wife, new wife there, Eva Braun, commit suicide. A lot of people believe, and this is the accepted story, that she committed suicide by cyanide poisoning. This would be Hitler's wife there. And then Hitler put a bullet in his head, and that's how he committed suicide. And of course, depending on the stories you believe or whatever, the story is that after they commit suicide, a couple days later, the Allies come in, they take over Berlin, they find the underground bunker. The Soviets get there first, and the Soviets remove the body of Eva Braun and the body of Hitler. And they don't show any evidence of it. They don't, take pictures and release that to the Allies. But according to them, according to the Russians, they go in, they take the bodies, they take them back to Russia. The odd thing is, there was for a long time, a lot of skepticism of what the Russians did with the body and if Hitler actually committed suicide. Especially a lot of the Germans. The Germans didn't believe that a man with such power, with such bravado, would commit suicide. They just didn't believe that he would. Regardless of what you accept, History Channel actually has a series out there called Hunting Hitler. And I've watched several episodes of it. It's interesting. It is interesting because Hitler had a master plan about what to do after European domination. And I'll leave that for tomorrow's lesson.